When your mind wakes up, it rips the veil off ordinary life. Small decisions become decisive, old pains become lessons, and the world rearranges itself around a quieter, fiercer clarity. Your life will never be the same. Most people imagine awakening as a lightning strike, a single cinematic instant when everything is revealed. The old stories prefer climax. But the kind of waking that changes a life is rarely a headline. It is a patient, insistent rearrangement of attention and habit. A quietly revolutionary patience that remakes how you inhabit each day. To say your mind wakes up is to say that the organ of perception stops being automatic and becomes deliberate. It learns to witness rather than simply respond. Think of fog over a harbor. From a small distance, you cannot tell ship from cliff, sound from signal. The first thing wakefulness does is thin the fog. Small signals begin to mean what they are instead of what your fear made them. The neighbor's curt word is no longer a general indictment of your worth. It is a single event with a causality you can trace. The anxious loop that once prepared you to overreact, the rapid pulse, the darting attention, the inner monologue of catastrophe, loses its primacy. You notice the loop, you name it, and you choose a different step. That is the work of awakening. Not elimination of feeling, but the cultivation of a witnessing. Stand so your feelings inform rather than command. Waking is also moral transformation. When your mind wakes, you become responsible in a new register. Not because some external arbiter appears, but because you experience the cost of your small acts more clearly. Each unfinished promise, each glance away from needed conversation, each time you opted for ease, sends ripples forward that you begin to see. The awakened mind accrues the habit of noticing consequences and then chooses differently. It is less about righteous purity than about fidelity. To your word, your projects, your people, fidelity is the grammar of sustained waking. This reorientation changes appetite. You no longer hunger primarily for distraction or instant approval. The awake mind seeks depth, not applause, integrity, not image, practice, not performance. The media of gratification, likes, rapid praise, easy consumption, thin in appeal, because they cannot feed the deeper metabolism now awake inside you. You replace fleeting dopamine loops with durable practices. This substitution is not ascetic, it is practical. You trade short-lived praise for long-lived capability. Waking also reconfigures time perception. When your mind is asleep, time is a blur of reaction. Days fold into one another with no cumulative architecture. When awake, you see sequence and compounding. You can feel where your life is being invested and where it is being squandered. This gives a new leverage. You can choose to plant small seeds in soil that will yield fruit where you will stand later. The future becomes a collaborator rather than a vague hazard. Finally, awakening cultivates humility. The newly awake do not claim omniscience. They adopt a posture of inquiry. They know how often sight deceives, how memory reshapes itself, how stories loop. They keep their conclusions provisional and approach life with patient curiosity. That humility is not self-denial. It is the discipline that prevents reversion to the old reflexes. The reflexes that once made you small. This quiet rousing is the most radical thing you can do. It is the decision to attend. Wakefulness is not grandstanding. It is the long apprenticeship of paying attention to small causes. The person who wakes in this way will find that the world is both more sober and more rich, more sober because illusion is removed, and more rich because reality contains far more materials to make of oneself than the old story allowed. Closing thought for section. Wake the mind and you will change the grammar of your days. Small attentions, steadily paid, redesign the whole of a life. If the first section described the posture of awakening, attention, fidelity, humility, so this section describes the engine. The interior mechanics by which waking rewrites outcomes. There are three primary systems to understand. Attention, what you let in. Narrative, how you explain it. And embodied memory, the felt traces that make you act. Each of these is trainable. When trained, they alter the probabilities of your life. Attention is the basic currency. Neuroscience calls it selective processing. Wisdom traditions have called it devotion. Whatever you habitually attend to becomes amplified in your life. The sleepy mind is a scatterer of attention. It lets every novelty, every provocation, and every idle worry commandeer its resource. The awake mind cultivates selective attention, a steady, repeated habit of focusing on what matters. This is not merely ferocious will. It is architecture. You sculpt your environment, You design time blocks, you practice single tasking as an ethical act. The effect is gravitational. Projects attract your best energy. Relationships receive your presence. And fear-based noise loses purchase. Narrative is the software that runs the machine. Thoughts are not inert. They are architects. The story you tell about an event determines the emotional valence, your response and the next action. A single event, an email, a slight, a missed opportunity always can be narrated as defeat, proof of incompetence, or as data for recalibration. The awake mind learns to treat its narratives as hypotheses rather than facts. It becomes adept at reframe, noticing that the first story is often a rehearsal for anxiety, and then choosing to try a more useful account. This is not mere optimism. It is cognitive discipline. You do not deceive yourself. You test narrative fidelity against evidence and utility. Embodied memory is the silent clerk. We think of memory as files in the brain, but memory is also stored in posture, breath and muscular tension. Trauma, shame, habitual fear, these map onto the body. When a familiar stressor appears, the body leans into the old response. Waking involves somatic re-education, practices that interrupt the automatic, bodily loop and allow new responses to be encoded. Breathwork, mindful movement, short rituals before speaking. These are practical tools that allow the body to adopt a different habit. Over time, the body learns new default responses. Steadier breath under duress, more openness in conversation, less constriction in facing difficulty. When attention, narrative, and embodied memory are retrained together, external reality follows. Relationships cease to be reactive theaters and begin to resemble co-created laboratories. Work becomes sustained instead of frantic. Opportunities appear because the active habits you've formed make you available to them. You are present to receive, disciplined enough to act, and confident enough to risk. The pattern is simple. Internal engineering begets external change. This interior work is not purely individualistic. It alters the social field. When one person changes the tone of their attention and response, it shifts the interactions around them. Families, teams, and networks respond to that new gravity. People who used to provoke you will discover you do not fuel the game anymore. That is not manipulation. It is boundary and clarity. Social ecologies adapt when the inside adapts. Technically, the interior mechanics are trained by repeated micro-practices. Choose a single focus for your attention, a short phrase to test alternative narratives, and a 3-minute somatic practice to anchor new responses. Use cues. The phone's buzz as a reminder to breathe. The morning coffee is a cue to write 3 minutes of what matters. Small interventions scale because of repetition. The awake mind is an engineered system of habits more than a state of rare vision. Finally, this interior rewiring is iterative. Expect regressions and have repair protocols. The mind relapses into old narrations when tired. Hungry or stressed, that is not failure, it is data. Keep gentle discipline and swift repair. The awakened person learns the technical art of returning, naming the lapse, doing a micro-practice, and reinstating the new narrative. Over time, the probability of relapse diminishes and the architecture stabilizes. Train attention, rehearse wiser stories, reprogram the body. These are the levers that make waking not merely insight but practical transformation. Waking the mind is not ceremonial unless ceremony becomes habit. The final movement of this argument addresses the soil of transformation, the practices that render insight durable. If awakening were an idea alone, it would be an ornament, but practiced, it becomes architecture. The person who wakes and then returns to old routines loses the waking quickly. The one who embeds small repeatable practices into each day sustains and grows. Ritual is the first stone. A ritual is any repeated sequence that anchors attention and intention. It need not be grand. A 5-minute morning reflection, a 30-second breath before answering messages, a nightly review of one promise kept. Rituals are not magic spells. They are scaffolds. They convert vagueness to habit and aspiration to habitus. The trick is to keep them tiny enough to start and sacred enough to continue. Sacredness here means non-negotiable value, not metaphysical drama. When a ritual is protected, it becomes a claim on time and identity. Repair is the second technology. You will fail. You will break promises. Repair protocols save you from shame spirals. A repair protocol is simple. Acknowledge quickly. apologize if necessary, name the corrective action, and execute the smallest next right thing. Repair models responsibility and preserves momentum. It also trains the mind to treat missteps as fixable rather than defining. The awakened life is full of repair because it is honest. No performance theater, just steady correction and realignment. The slow architecture of change is the patient insistence on smallness. Do not seek dramatic reinvention. Design cumulative improvements. The metaphor of compounding returns applies here as well. 10 minutes of practice daily, a consistent boundary, a protected evening of reading each week. These produce a personal capital that yields competence, character, and influence. The contemplative radical here is consistency. It is both humble and brutal. It prefers repetition over inspiration and discipline over dramatic promises. Community scaffolds practice. The solitary mystique is romantic but incomplete. We are social animals. Rituals become more likely when witnessed. Repairs are easier when a trusted other holds you accountable, and practices deepen when exchanged with peers. Choose companions who value fidelity and depth. Public smallness and telling one friend about the ritual you are protecting increases the likelihood you will sustain it. Measurement matters, but in a humane way. Track little signals, not grand vanity metrics. Did you write today? Did you keep the promise you made this morning? Did you apologize when you were defensive? The ledger should be a servant, not a tyrant. Evidence for repair and refinement, not a tool for condemnation. Use data to course-correct gently. Finally, hold a futurist conversation periodically with the person you are becoming. Write a letter to your future self. Not in platitudes, but in practical terms. What would you ask them to thank you for? What small practice would you ask them to insist you started? Make that letter visible and let it act as a moral telescope. Viewing the present from the future's vantage changes the present's economy immediately. To becoming through practice is not glamorous, but it is honest work, and it yields a life that can be felt in the body and recognized by others. The awakened mind that is practiced becomes generative. It creates stable relationships, deep craft, and a presence that quietly alters contexts. That is the true miracle, not a sudden conversion, but a steady accrual of truth in action. Wake the mind, tend the mechanics, and practice the small liturgies of repair and ritual, and do this and your life will change, quietly, inevitably, and forever.